The whistleblower needs to come before Congress as a material witness because he worked for Joe Biden at the same time Hunter Biden was getting money from corrupt oligarchs. I say tonight to the media, do your job and print his name.
Yet, as he admitted on Fox News, he himself has declined to out the whistleblower.
I don't understand what prevents you from getting on the Senate floor where you're protected on all kinds of things and just giving a speech and saying what the guy's name is if you're convinced you know who it is.
No, I can, and I may, but I can do it right now if I want. Nothing stops me. There's no law that stops me from doing it. Other than that, I don't want to make it about the one individual.
This has become a common talking point for the president, who said this on Friday.
The whistleblower is a disgrace to our country, a disgrace. And the whistleblower, because of that, should be revealed.
So yesterday, I sat down with Senator Paul in Chicago. Why does the name of the whistleblower matter?
You know, as you know, I've been a big defender of whistleblowers. Edward Snowden is probably the most famous whistleblower of all time, and I'm a great defender of his. So I think we should protect whistleblowers, but I do think that there's a competing right that others have, that when you're accused of a crime, you should get to confront your accuser. That's part of the Sixth Amendment, and I think it's important that the president get that protection as well.
But in this instance, it's almost superfluous because seemingly what the whistleblower has said in that complaint has been confirmed by Vindman, by Taylor,
I guess the problem is about 60 people listened to that phone call probably by the time it was passed around in the White House. Most of them say that there wasn't a problem with it at all, so it's an opinion. And so really it's not that there's a whistle being blown that, oh no, there's a secret that the president did something. All of the people knew it. 60 some odd people knew about it, and most of them had a public policy opinion that it wasn't a problem. So when you have a disagreement on policy, is that really whistleblowing? So there is some question whether this actually fits the definition of a whistleblowing. But either way, if it's this person's opinion that he thought it was illegal and he was blowing the whistle on something illegal, that's his opinion. He needs to come forward and we need to hear it from him. Otherwise, we're just going to hear other people's opinions. Why wouldn't we hear the opinion from the guy who instigated the whole process?
But if you're outing the whistleblower, who will be the next whistleblower? I mean, what about the chilling effect of this?
I think the whistleblower statutes were intended to protect you from being fired or persecuted. I think the greatest whistleblower of all time we're still persecuting, and that's Edward Snowden, and we should change the statute. So I've offered a bill to actually expand the whistleblower statute to be retroactive, to include all contractors for government. Edward Snowden said that he would actually have come forward, but he wasn't covered by the whistleblower statute. So I think there are things we can do on it, but I don't think the whistleblower statute was ever intended to say, oh, if this goes to court and we're going to put somebody in jail on your word, that you wouldn't have to testify. In fact, most people acknowledge that in court proceedings, the Sixth Amendment does protect you and does mean that that you will have to come forward to challenge your accuser.
That which we learned from the whistleblower in the complaint seemed to then have been backed up by the transcript, backed up by Vindman, backed up by Taylor, backed up by Mick Mulvaney,
right.
Senator Johnson. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of corroboration out there for it, which would seem to lessen.
I don't think anybody disputes that the president wanted to influence the investigation of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. But at the same time, Joe Biden wanted to do the same thing. He wanted to influence an investigation concerning his son. So he went to Ukraine and he's bragged about this. I told him I'm cutting off $1 billion in your aid if you don't fire one particular prosecutor. That sounds sort of a little bit like the same thing. We're going after one particular person in another country. Why would we be telling a country they have to fire one person? And there is a debate, but there are people on our side who do believe that that prosecutor was investigating a Ukrainian oligarch that was paying Hunter Biden $50,000 a month. So I think they're similar. And so we can't have two different standards. We can't say, oh, well, Joe Biden gets a pass, but we're going to actually impeach the president over this. It's a difference of opinions, the kind of stuff that should be decided in an election. But if we're going to criminalize the presidency, my fear is this is just going to happen all the time. It's going to become the new normal like they do in Latin America, where every time the president finishes a term, someone puts him in jail. I think it's a bad thing for the country.
Do you think that censure is a more appropriate route, given the underlying facts as you understand them, than impeachment?
I think there are a lot of different ways people could. I think it's essentially a policy decision. I think some people believe that you can condition aid on whether or not there's corruption. In fact, the law for foreign aid says that you cannot give foreign aid to a country if you believe them to be corrupt. And I think the president honestly believes that there was corruption between and conflict of interest between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden making $50,000 a month. So I think you could look at this perfectly as the president just following the law.
If this were to turn into a censure move and it's not an impeachment move, would you be willing to consider censuring the president for his conduct here?
No, because I think this is a public policy decision. I think it's a difference in an opinion. Would I have done it that way? No. If I were talking to the Ukrainian president, I would say, hell no, you don't get any money because we don't have any money. You know, we basically are $1 trillion short. We borrow money from China to send it to Ukraine, so I'm not for giving Ukraine any money. And I really think we should stay out of the affairs of other countries. I don't think we should be asking, neither for Hunter Biden stuff, but Joe Biden shouldn't be also getting so involved in Ukrainian affairs. So I think they're the same. I think everybody's trying to influence Ukrainian aid for whatever they want. Look, Menendez sent a letter saying if you don't investigate Trump on the Mueller investigation, if you don't continue the Mueller investigation, we'll cut your aid. So everybody seems to be threatening Ukraine's aid.
Why in this case is it not extortion? Essentially the president saying, I have something you want, and unless you do me this personal solid, find dirt on a domestic political opponent, you're not getting it.
Well, like I say, everybody seems to be threatening their aid. President Obama was told by Congress to give them $300 million in lethal aid. He gave them blankets. So he didn't follow the letter of the law. He chose not to give them lethal aid, even though Congress told him to. So he actually withheld aid. I think presidents from time past have been trying to influence and give aid, and they don't always give the aid the way Congress tells them, and then there's a dispute between the branches. But that's a public policy dispute. That isn't something, if we're going to impeach presidents over everything that's a public policy dispute, we're going to criminalize the presidency, and we're going to be in this all the time.
Final question then. Based on what I think I've understood you to say, why doesn't the president just own it and stop saying no quid pro quo, and instead, Senator, say there was a quid pro quo, it was all about corruption, and I didn't want to have them get the money?
Right. If you're my barber and I give you $20 for a haircut and you cut my hair, that's quid pro quo. I think we have gotten tied up in this Latin phrase that it means something. It's only bad if you're asking for something that's corrupt or if you're bribing somebody. I think I think you can make a valid case that what he was asking for is studying corruption. Hunter Biden making $50,000 a month, I think most Americans...
But that's not inherently corrupt.
Well, I think if you ask most Americans, does it pass the smell test? Do you think there might be corruption there? This is a young man. In our country, you don't get like 35-year-old people all of a sudden on big major corporations. This is really, really unusual. There were people at the time telling Joe Biden that there could be a conflict of interest. In fact, the whistleblower, we need to know what he was thinking at that time because he was working on the Ukraine desk at the time Joe Biden was over there and Hunter Biden was working for this oligarch.
Thank you.